October or November, planning staff was planning on going to the Planning and Zoning Commission to suggest a change to that kitchen definition to make it a little bit more flexible. And we had also suggested a number of other potential amendments to the UDO to clarify other things related to homestead regulations. At that time, it was recommended that we pull off a little bit so we can work
revising that kitchen definition any further.
So are you saying, I'm getting kind of confused here. Are you saying that basically staff would be okay with just stopping right here, just putting a period after appliances?
I think if council prefers this first more flexible definition, there's an option to include it as is, or revise it the way the Homestay Network group has suggested, where we would add language that says requiring 220 volts or gas after cooking appliances.
Right there.
And I think, again, the unintended consequence of making that particular change could be that folks would still get like a smaller sort of kitchen possibly, but with the plug-in, it could have an impact where accessory dwelling units, for example, could then have those units. One could argue that that would make ADUs maybe more open to having a homestay type of residence in it, and that could be more of a policy discussion or policy call. But I do defer to the public as well, and Jackson here may have some other comments about the definition and some of his thinking behind the suggested language from the Homestay Network.
Todd, I may be able to add, I think that staff, it has been working off of developing a definition that meets the intent of what council was trying to achieve, which is to allow as many units as possible to be rented long-term. So the way that the definition was written before is limiting it to 2 items, which would make it more like a hotel room, so that you don't have, you can choose 2 of 3. If you add the language, I think that that the Homestay Network is recommending, then it does allow for more intention on the part of a person enforcing it to say, well, you really could have a 3rd appliance here. All you have to do is plug it in and move it in. And then you have 3 out of 3 items required for a kitchen. So if council is saying, hey, if we have a homestay and someone's staying there, we're okay with it being interpreted this way. I think staff is being more conservative in relying upon the fact that council is asking for as many units as possible to be rented long-term. Does that make sense? And if you have 3 out of 3 in a kitchen, it makes it much easier to rent long-term.
So Kathy, just I apologize for this. So in terms of this definition, right, with the Todd just kind of finished writing on, there's not 2 out of 3 things. That was the previous definition, right? That's what you're referring to.
The previous definition had a lot of things about the width of a sink and all this other stuff.
Right.
If you add leaving the 220 volts for gas, then that means that you can easily do a sink, a microwave, and then also have the convection stove and or plug in a stove. So you really can later go back and amend it and have 3 out of 3. And so staff's intent has been to not leave their, when they're there to do the inspection, to make it easy on the person doing the inspection, to say you're only going to have 2 out of 3 appliances to constitute the definition of a kitchen. When you add in leaving the 220 volts, that allows for a stovetop, a countertop, convection, another way of cooking that would allow more flexibility within the unit to be used to have all 3 types of cooking devices or appliances within a kitchen to constitute the definition.
But again, going back to, now we're not going to do the 2 out of 3 anymore. We're just going to say kitchen. And but if you Todd, if we left the wording as it's proposed, which is the maximum flexibility, do you feel like that meets council's objective?
Yes.
And we don't do the requiring 220 volts or gas.
That's correct. I think planning staff feels that if you kept the language as is proposed by planning staff, that we felt that met council's intent of having longer term, like defining between longer term versus the shorter term type of units.
And I think what, at least one concern that I've heard with that, with leaving it, is around toaster ovens. Is that right? And wanting people to have some way to reheat or heat. So I'm wondering if that can just, if you could leave the definition, and maybe after ovens, put except toaster ovens. I mean, I sort of think about it, we're trying to deal with it in the negative here, sort of like these are things that can't be in a homestay kind of space, but if you think about it in sort of the positive, what we would all expect to be would be, a refrigerator, a coffee maker, a countertop microwave, maybe countertop toaster oven. So it's another way to think about it.
Or is there a way to define ovens as like standard size or big or something like that?
So for my take on this, Todd, because I guess you're looking for feedback because we're giving it to you, whether you're looking for it or not.
No, I think
So from my perspective, I'm actually okay with what you have up there requiring the 220 volts or gas, as the kitchen, the cooking appliance is required to. From my own perspective, again, this is coming from me, the rough-in stuff doesn't bother me as long, if that's something that's in there, if somebody's cheating on this, then obviously we want the enforcement to come down hard on that, and I think that's the 3 strikes you're out, and I understand there's gonna be folks out there who's cheating, and I've said before, I don't have any patience for folks who are doing that, but in terms of having those rough-ins without sort of completing that, I'm fine with that.
What requires a 220?
I think that would be sort of a larger
Like a regular
type
size
of
stove and
I'm not sure if any of our building
Is that right?
folks or
Yeah, it's like
Sharon
a
might.
conventional oven.
conventional oven and stove?
It's a regular size, yeah.
How about a refrigerator? Big regular size refrigerator?
And a big refrigerator requires a 220. No?
So this,
A big one?
so under this definition, either with the recommended changes from Homestay Network representatives or city staff, you could still have a refrigerator, and that would not be counted to be a kitchen.
And the reason I'm thinking through this, and the way I kind of think about this, is I'm kind of equating this to a hotel and those type of extended stays. And again, that's something that wouldn't not having an appliance in there that's got a 220 volt or a gas line, to me would be more in line with something like that. That's where my mind's coming from on this.
Yeah, and I guess so the balance here that we're trying to strike is sort of micromanaging what can be there while also sort of drawing the lines clearly enough for enforcement purposes. Where I sort of go on this is, so that's what a kitchen is, that, it's a place for preparing and cooking food, and that contains cooking appliances. I mean, one option might be to just say, period, appliances permitted in homestays include, and then just say coffee maker, toaster oven, countertop microwave, something like that. I don't know. You can
Yeah, but
do that.
I'm a little worried about that only because, well, what if somebody wanted to put a popcorn maker in? Is that
Right.
allowed?
Right. Or you could say,
so-
countertop appliances such as.
Yeah, and not that we have to wordsmith this today, but I
Yeah.
could certainly take the intent
Yeah.
Uh,
of your feedback today and try to work on this definition some more.
Yeah, I get, and I do, I guess I disagree a little with Councilman Kapoor in the sense that I don't want it to be easy to switch back and forth from a short-term rental to a long-term rental by just plugging something in. So, this idea that, as soon as the inspector walks out the door, you can convert it to a short-term rental to a, to a short, where someone could actually use it for, it's not a hotel room anymore.
And that's where that more restrictive definition,
Right.
I think,
Yeah, but again.
might address that.
Well,
But-
I think that goes a little too far, because, again, I support the idea that, someone might build something and want to use it as a short-term rental, and then eventually be done with that and have a long-term rental. So I think being able to build it with the intent of having a long-term renter in there is fine. So I feel like the other one goes a little bit too far. So,
Okay.
do you have what you need?
Yeah, I think
Aren't you glad you
we could certainly, we know, I think there's a preference, I'd say, for the maximum flexibility definition, but with some tweaks that,
With some,
based
with some
on the comments today.
orders. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll hear from Jackson on this as well.
Yeah.
Um,
And certainly, if they have recommendations as well, we're always very open to hear what those might be.
Right. I just had a couple of other, if we can maybe go back to the matrix, if we're finished with the kitchen. Okay.
And you certainly don't, in terms of any other things that they needed to ask about, or you would ask about the ones that they're in agreement in, or no?
No, I'm asking about ones that they're not.
Okay.
So any questions? I assume we don't have any other questions about ones we're in agreement
No.
on. Okay. So number 6 and 7, which was about the bedroom. And so I know this will be, on your agenda for continued conversations. And I suppose the question of whether it's legal to regulate that is one thing, but it seems to me if we can limit it to 2 bedrooms, we can probably also say something about this. But, I guess I just had some suggested language for people to consider that, a very simple statement that says, neither of the bedrooms to be rented can be bedrooms normally used by the occupants of the home, or something like that. That's just.
So the reason I think that we wanted to hold off is to get Brad involved in this.
Yeah.
And I think these were recommendations that we had from previous attorneys. And so anything that we wanted to enforce from this point forward, we felt like Brad.
Yeah.
And we just didn't have enough time to get him
That's great.
in this.
And then could you say, so again, we're not going to dive in deep here, but say a little bit more about 9, because what I read the Homestay Network folks is saying is that accessory structures are different from ADUs, and so what are we need, and maybe we can just wait and let Jackson give us some clarity on that, but.
Sure, and I'm not sure if the intent here had to deal with where an ADU might have a separate, entrance versus maybe an accessory like a basement or something like that that could be within the same home structure. I'm not sure if that was the concern that the Homestay Network had, but.
Okay. Well, maybe you can talk to us about that when you
Mhm.
come. And then I guess my thought on the grandfathering is, that this grandfathering really matters when we make big changes. And, I feel like we can, the next time we make a big change, like if we ever make a big change, like we did with the kitchen, that was a pretty big change, that we could just better address grandfathering at that point. I don't know that, again, we're not suggesting, you're not proposing to deal with it in this round of changes, and I just don't know that it needs to be, so.
Okay.
Okay, so any other questions for Todd? Okay, so then anything else that you have for us?
Just that we'll, continue to work with the Homestay Network folks, and we'll work on that wordsmithing of the definition. And so at some point in the near future, you should see these other 3 items coming back before council, the full council.
Right, and so they're not going to come back here, they're just going to go straight to planning and zoning and then to council?
Yes.
Okay, based on this input, okay. All right, so let's, before we sort of, I guess we are we even taking a vote on this? Or-
Yeah, well, we need to move this part, we were going to move this part forward.
Okay, so
The
we need to
definition,
recommend to move it
so
forward.
recommend,
So
yeah.
before we do that, we'll take public comment, so. Jackson, I'm guessing you want to talk to us. And as you're coming up, let me just say, I really do appreciate and want to thank the Homestay Network and you in particular for leading the charge on working collaboratively with the city on this. We're certainly, again, the room is empty in that. That has not happened when this has been on our agenda for a long time.
Yeah, and it's certainly by design. Well, first of all, thank you. I appreciate your comments. It's been an interesting road here for the last number of years. I think the no pun intended, but the kitchen thing has caused things to boil over.
On a stove that can't be there.
That's right. That's right. But no, we purposefully asked folks not to be here tonight. We gave them a full update after our meeting with the city on Thursday, which we reported to you that we thought was extremely positive, and we've got a number of next steps planned, which we're pretty excited about. So we basically told them that we would, have a continuing conversation here and hope that things would come out positively. I was reflecting a little bit coming into the meeting, looking at the agenda and thinking that the city would get ready to talk about kitchens when every other problem in the city was solved, because there's only one more thing left to do. But seriously, we do appreciate that. And it's interesting how difficult a very simple subject like kitchens can be. I mean, how many conversations have we had about this? And it's easy to get confused. So, and I appreciate the conversation that we had here a moment ago. A couple of quick comments on kitchens. We surveyed our membership twice now. The first time we got 370 responses, and we asked them a whole bunch of different questions. And we asked them a lot about what is the configuration of their existing homestay. And the numbers are approximate, but about 40% of the people have some sort of a convenience bar, or I won't say food preparation, but some place to have coffee or store some food and whatnot. And only 8% of the total had a space that could be used for long-term rental. So it seems kind of odd that there would be so many houses in Asheville that have and had full-on kitchens. You would walk in and there would be literally a 220-volt stove. There'd be a large refrigerator. And as you probably know, a lot of people were renting their units out long-term, but they did not meet the long-term requirements. Building structure, they did not have the fire barriers between the long-term rental and the long-term. They did not have separate HVAC systems to prevent fires from being transmitted through ductwork. And they did not have a separate electrical system as required by ADU. So the point for bringing that up is that if the people who currently have homestay permits want to do long-term, 92% of them can't do it unless they invest a fairly significant amount of money in doing that. So back last summer, when we had throngs of people over at the firehouse talking passionately about kitchens, what you're hearing is people who did in fact pull out their stoves and put it in their garage to allow them to get short-term permits. And we know there was people who dragged them right back in after the inspector left, but we do believe that was the vast minority. But there are people who are saving that space for either elderly parent who eventually will move in, a healthcare worker that will eventually move in to care for them, a child that's moving back from school, et cetera, et cetera. And for them to move the stove back in and plug it in makes perfect sense. We don't want to put barriers. So the challenge becomes, do we write rules to prevent people from cheating and make it as difficult as possible to reinstall a stove, recognizing that only 8% of those spaces could be used for long-term rental? Or do we allow the 40% who have some possible other use other than long-term rental to make it easier for them to shift in and out? And I thought what I heard last summer was, hey, well, let's make it easier for those folks. So I guess that's the first point. The second that I'll make real quickly is prior to January 9th, 2018, the building, if you went down to the building department and asked them what a kitchen was, there was no place that it was written, but they communicated it was a place that there was food preparation, and food preparation was evidenced by 220 or gas. If you didn't have that, then you couldn't prepare food, and so therefore you didn't have a kitchen. And if you don't have a kitchen, you don't have a dwelling unit. And I don't know how many years they operated under that way, but that's the way it was. And so fast forward to January 9th, 2018, there were 14 things now. It was not pick two. It was any one of the 14 things could define as a kitchen, even it be a rough-in plug. So I think we are swinging back, and of course the Homestay Network would like it to be exactly the way it was prior to January 9th. Because of coffee pots, teapots, toaster ovens, and I think, as Gwen mentioned, there's lots of things with 110 plugs that are innocuous.
Right.
And so I think to go back into that slippery slope could be complicated. It's not to say we can't work through it, but I'm just saying I think it adds a complication that, again, keeping our eye on the longer goal of preserving long-term rentals, I think it's not the bulk of what we're talking about here. So I guess I'll just leave it in the hands of staff to say, you understand what we'd like. There's probably a way to list out lots of things, but I would caution against that. I suspect that if that were the case, more people coming into the room to have that 110 appliance, we will hear from every one of them about why their situation is different. And I'm sure it'll be fascinating conversation. But at the end of the you can't hardly wait. This is good stuff. But at the end of the day, it may not really move the needle in terms of what we're all trying to do here. So that was the first one.
And just to be clear, Jackson, I'm giving you a longer time because you've been
You've
been a key partner in this.
Yeah, and I had forgotten that, so I'll try to move this along. The matrix that was shown here is one from October of last year. We've had an update that was done in February, which we sat down with staff February 6th. We reviewed that. We went in detail in that meeting and had some great conversation, including why grandfathering, there is no grandfathering,
Right.
We can't say we want it. The rules just don't allow that. So anyway, these are the minutes from that meeting. I'd like to make this as part of the record.
Sure. Go ahead and give them to Whitney. That'd be great. Thanks.
So that should really supersede this color matrix and some of the comments that we had there. And this reflects the second survey that we did with our network of 315 people that responded to each of those 11 items. So I think we have some really good data to support that. I won't get into you asked some questions about bedrooms and detached accessory structures and grandfathering, so I won't get into those right now. But I will end on how we left our meeting on Thursday, and that is that we agreed to not only talk about these items here, but to do a process mapping of the homestay permitting process, which was really interesting because as we got Ben Woody and Todd Oklachaney and Brad in the room, there wasn't a total understanding of exactly what the rules are today, and even what we understand them to be. So we decided that we would carve out a couple hours, we would put some stickies on the wall and literally map through who does what when, what form do you use, what does that form look like, what's the origin of that form, et cetera, et cetera. And I think once we really lock down on what the current system is, then we can kind of tee up each of these additional items to say, well, not only what is the item, but what is the intent of the item, and what are the resources of the Homestay Network that we can assist in coming up with other ideas, now knowing what the intent is. So I'm really looking forward to that process, and we feel like it is continues the dialogue that we've been having with the city over the last couple months, and we look forward to getting it on the calendar.
Good, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on this item? All right. Before we motion something on, I want to talk about the other issue that was mentioned in the memo, which is about the staff's work or attempts to work with the platforms. And I think the memo references the idea of moving ahead with drafting an ordinance change that would hold the platforms liable for that same $500 a day fine. And so whoever makes a motion, if you would include that in your motion.
So the only thing I'd ask you about that is that your motion be to ask the city attorney to review that, because again, he was not here at the time we had the meetings with the platforms, and I would feel more comfortable if he were to be the one to make the recommendation and the decision about what we can do.
Yeah, I just think it's important for us to take a step on this. Apparently, who is it? Somebody from Airbnb called me right at 3 o'clock. Right. Called me at 3 o'clock, so they saw the memo, and it apparently got their attention, which is good. So, and if they're happy to come to the dance now, then maybe we don't have to do this. But okay, is there a motion about moving these recommendations forward?
Oh, yeah. Oh, this? Okay.
So I will move to the full council recommendation of staff regarding the kitchen definition, the age of the host, and the proof of residency, as well as a request for the city attorney to review legal options and ordinances related to holding platforms accountable for violations.
Second.
Okay. Then we are all in favor of that. So there we go. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. There's our agenda. Okay. We have no new business and any public comment from anybody else on anything. All right. If not, then we stand adjourned. Thanks. Shortest piece.